Buongiorno!
Oh my gosh. We're in Italy.
Yes. Okay, before we start, if you guys do us a favor, because we are so excited to be here, but we just really want to commemorate this moment forever. Can we have a selfie with you guys? But you know what? We're going to take a video, so do us a favor and just for a second, clap and yell like our talk was great, will you?
Like it was the best one.
Yeah, will you do it? Oh, hold on, wait, this way. Okay. Ready? Okay, yeah? Go.
Prima.
We love you guys.
Grazie.
Okay, let's do our talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not actually doing lazy loading.
No, we're doing state management with GraphQL and Apollo Angular Client.
Ciao.
I'm Bonnie Brennan. I'm an Angular GDE, a founder of NG Houston, and a regular panelist on Angular Air. This is my child component, Samantha. She's nerd humor. She's also an Angular developer and a teacher who has recently started branching out into 3D animation.
Yes, and like Aishkul said, we just moved from Texas to Amsterdam, so you guys will be seeing a lot more of us, which we are so excited about. We
can just come to Italy anytime we want.
We're in Italy.
We're very excited about that.
I'm really excited to be here. So in this talk, our objective is to teach about a simple state management option using GraphQL and Apollo Angular Client.
Today, we're going to cover state management simplified, GraphQL as your personal chef, the awesome Apollo Angular Client, and some additional bonus features and resources.
State management simplified.
As an Angular expert, I consult on a lot of teams, and state management is one of the biggest things that I see developers struggling with. Sometimes introducing state management to your app can actually accidentally make it more complicated. Seriously, this stuff can be intimidating because it gets a little advanced.
It can be intimidating, but once you're familiar with it, it's not scary at all. And these two guys, Mike Ryan and Austin McDaniel, are the authors of NGRX and NGXS, and they are not scary at all. They've worked really hard to provide great libraries with great documentation, and you can find them on Twitter at Mike Ryan Dev and Austin McDaniel because they're really great humans. And
speaking of NGRX, we also have to shout out to Rob Wormald, who came up with the NGRX concept, Brandon Roberts, who helped Mike write NGRX, and Thomas Burleson, who taught us NGRX.
Grazie!
We had originally planned to include NGRX in our talk, and then we found out that Mike Ryan is actually going to be here, and he's talking about NGRX, and he wrote NGRX, so there's no way that we could teach it better than Mike. So today we're going to focus on GraphQL and Apollo, and Mike will be here in a bit to talk about NGRX.
So you probably already know about inputs, outputs, and event emitters handling component communication. This is a very cool feature of Angular that's part of what makes it so powerful.
In this illustration, the red ball represents communication between components. When you first start out with an application, this is super simple.
Super simplice.
Super simplice. Probably our pronunciation is really bad, but we love Italian culture, so just bear with us, you know.
It's just really fun to say. However,
simplice.
Too many inputs and outputs can make your app really confusing and messy as it scales.
No, super simplice.
When your app is large, it's hard to keep track of all of your components sending messages to each other.
State management was introduced to solve this complexity problem.
Problema. So you see the fancy box? A box is our single source of truth. Now all of our components can communicate with the single source of truth instead of communicating with each other.
Which is much less messy and complicated.
Super simplice.
Super simplice.
So how do we know which state management we need?
That's a very good question. Here's a good rule of thumb for whether or not you need a more complicated state management system. If all you're doing is basic CRUD operations, fetching data, writing data back, you really should probably keep it very simple and try not to overcomplicate things. But if you have real-time updates, if you're doing a lot of complicated stuff with RxJS, you might be introducing some race conditions, and this is when you should think about learning more about state management and taking it a little more seriously. By the way, the only thing Sam likes more than Angular is Blender. And the only thing she likes more than Blender is pizza! So what is GraphQL?
GraphQL is a middle layer between your data and your client. So we're going to go into a grocery store example for our database. As in, anytime you need data, you get your data from the store. This animation represents what your app would look like without GraphQL. It's very common for us to have databases with nested lookup fields that result in multiple round trips to the database every time the user interacts with your page. GraphQL streamlines the process of collecting data. In this example, GraphQL is your personal chef, the middle layer between you and the store. Instead of multiple round trips, you have one trip, getting everything you need and delivering it all at once. We call it a chef rather than a shopper because our chef also has the ability to manipulate the food, which we will get into a little bit later.
Like cooking the food? Yeah. Why doesn't he have a hat in this one? Sorry, I'm sorry.
You know, 3D animation is kind of hard.
So what problem does GraphQL solve? Number one, you can avoid excessive round trips to the database because it's going to bundle all of your queries into one. And also, with GraphQL, we're going to show you how you can query only what you need and not return the whole entire object.
That's what I'm talking about. So when I first started using GraphQL, I kept running across words that I was not familiar with, and it made it kind of hard. So really quick, we're just going to go over some vocab words so that everybody can benefit.
Super simplice.
Super simplice.
I would bet you that once we show you the words and what they mean, it's really easy. It's just they're using different words than we're used
Super
to,
simplice.
but it's still the same common.
You got this.
So what's a query?
A query is a question that you ask the database for specific data.
Simplice. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, because if I'm not, I keep saying it wrong.
We got a big laugh from the front row. I think that's a no.
Are we saying it wrong? Yes.
Yes.
Say it. How do you say it?
Yes, we were saying it wrong.
Semplice.
Semplice.
We have a real Italian here for support, so
Semplice.
thank you very much. Okay, so a query can also be more complicated. Well, not complicated. It's not. It's basic. It looks like a JSON object, but you can nest queries to handle related data and avoid these round-trip lookups. You can also pass variables at multiple levels. So this is how you can get only the data that you need rather than pulling everything and then mapping through it on your client.
A mutation is anything that changes the data in the database.
And a schema is just your data model, like a TypeScript interface. Simplice. No, I said it wrong again. Simplice. Simplice. I'm so glad you're here, Mateo. Thank you. So when I was learning this, it really helped me to compare GraphQL terms to CRUD, right? So a query is a read, and everything else is a mutation. Simplice.
Simplice.
Oh, sorry. We get a little excited, guys. Let's talk about the awesome Apollo Angular client. We should probably show them some actual code because they're developers and they want to see the code. Let's talk about Apollo first. Apollo client is a really flexible GraphQL client for Angular, JavaScript, and native platforms.
By the way, Apollo client is not only for Angular. They also have implementations in React, Vue, Meteor, Ember, Polymer, Swift, and Java.
Good job. We're going to show you several examples of what the code looks like, but if you want to implement this in your own project, we recommend going straight to the Apollo docs. They're really great documentation. Just ask Austin McDaniel.
Uh-oh.
We have no audio, but I promise you this is Austin saying that the...
He's raving about the docs, and they're really great. They cover everything. They're just really awesome and simple and explain everything, and check out the docs.
Can we try it again? It's OK if we don't have it.
It's better coming from Austin, you know? Let's watch it again.
We could just tell them right now that he's saying like anything. He's actually talking about how great we are.
He's a big fan of us.
Yeah.
Yes. He's going to kill us.
Oh, he is going to kill us.
Yes.
OK, don't tell him, guys. Let's move on.
OK, so Apollo uses the Angular schematics. So all you need to do is ng add Apollo Angular.
Super simply. Now, Simplice.
Simplice.
Simplice. It's because I was saying it wrong like 10 times, and now I can't go back to this. Simplice. You have to help me every time.
Oh, man.
OK, so ng add Apollo Angular. I love schematics.
Next thing you have to do is add Apollo to your project by extending your module. Again, this code is from the Apollo docs. In the snippet, you can see a link to a live working sandbox. Okay, yep. And you can see that they provided for you, and it's really cool, so check it out. But if you were actually implementing this into your own project, you would have to replace that with your own GraphQL server.
Which might sound complicated, but it's just a couple lines of code. It's not nearly as intimidating as I thought it was when I first learned. I was a GraphQL server. That's super. No, it's a Simplice. Simplice.
Simplice.
Yeah, Simplice. By the end of this talk, we will know how to say Simplice.
That's what we're teaching, actually. This is just a cover.
Okay,
Updating local data.
There are two ways to mutate your local data: direct writes and resolvers.
So direct writes. So remember our store example. If your database is a grocery store, then your local data would be the refrigerator. With a direct write, you just stick something straight in the fridge as is. With a resolver, you're going to modify the data in some way, like a recipe, before you put it in the fridge. Your chef could even make another trip to the grocery store if needed.
I want a personal chef.
Right?
So you can think of direct writes like a client-side mutation. You're sending updates straight to the cache. These are used for simple one-off mutations, and then you can immediately subscribe to your updated cache using watch query. And here's what the code looks like. If you use write data, you just send it your updated values. This will update the same value in your local storage immediately. Resolvers will be used for more complicated cases. Remember we said if it's just CRUD, keep it simple. If you have any more complicated stuff going on, then you might want resolvers, which actually would look a lot like NGRX.
You got to take it from the store, and you got to do something with it.
Yeah.
You got to change the food.
You got to cook it.
You got to cook the food.
Yeah. OK, so you can reuse resolvers by specifying the functions in your resolver map. And also, resolvers are, oh, I clicked too fast. Resolvers are easy to spot due to their 4 parameters.
What are the 4 parameters?
I'm glad you asked. The resolver parameters are the object, which is the result returned from the resolver, args, arguments passed into the field, context, which are methods used to manipulate the cache, and then info, which is info about the state of the query, and it's going to look like this. I don't know if you can see that. It's kind of dark.
Objects, args, contact, info.
Sorry, it's gone. Here's a more specific example. This resolver uses get cache key to toggle a to-do item to show as completed. I'm just going to leave it there for a minute and let them absorb it. Isn't it great? It's beautiful.
If you got to mutate your data with more complexity, resolver.
Resolver. Simplice.
Yes!
Yeah.
First try.
We got a nod from our Italian.
Oh, yeah.
OK, querying local data.
Querying the Apollo cache is similar to querying your GraphQL server. The only difference is that you add an @client directive on your local fields to indicate that they should be resolved from the cache.
So here's what it looks like when you write your query. And you can see the @client there in the 3rd row. So it basically looks exactly like a regular query. Just add the @client. And then you're also adding the @client down here. This, by the way, is straight from the Angular docs. No, from the Apollo docs. Sorry. They both start with A. So you can check out the Apollo docs and see more examples of this.
Great Apollo docs. Great docs.
And this is what it looks like when you call that same query inside your ng on a net.
So watching your query looks exactly like it did before. But having @client in your query is what tells it to pull from your local storage. So basically, we can go to the fridge instead of going to the store.
Simplice. OK, so we've covered setup with schematics. We've covered how to update and query your local data with Apollo State Management. Apollo also has a section on client-side schemas and combining local and remote data. We had actually included all of it, but we were running out of time, and there's more stuff that's super cool that we really wanted to include, so we had to cut a little bit of it. But the thing is, if you want to learn more about this, go to the Apollo docs because they're really good.
Have we mentioned the Apollo docs are really good? They're very good. Very good docs.
Lots of love for whoever wrote the Apollo docs. Okay, bonus features and resources.
This is my favorite part.
I included this section because this is, well, except for the graphical, which is cool. This is some of the stuff that I did not know about when I first learned GraphQL that would have made my life a whole lot easier. So for anyone new to GraphQL, this is, well, and also the thin clients is just kind of a concept, like an architectural thing. So as far as thin clients, as a best practice, you want to keep your data services on the server if you can, and GraphQL can help with that. This is great for faster communication between the data source and the client. So if your data services are on the server right next to your database, it's all synchronous, and it happens super fast. And then the data source and client, you have less round trips because it's going to go and get everything that you need from the store and bring it back all in one trip rather than going over and over and over to ping the database.
So you can get only what you need and not everything.
Right. And also that means you're going to have less actual data being transmitted across Wi-Fi. And we do so much on mobile that this should definitely be something that we're thinking about.
Your page will load faster.
Yeah. Also, speaking of your page loading faster, you're going to putting your resolvers in GraphQL will mean less code in your client bundle. So when you have that main.js, you want that to be as small as possible. More built-in Apollo features.
More?
They have so much cool stuff that comes out of the box. It's great.
Auto-mocking server, easy error handling, optimistic UI, developer tools, subscriptions, and integrating with NativeScript, which can all be found in the Apollo docs.
Yay!
Yay!
Community resources. These are the cool things that I wish I had known about. I shouldn't have put this in this section because this actually comes with GraphQL, but I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before. It's called Graphical. This is a great resource that comes straight out of the box with GraphQL. It's a super clean interface that actually allows you to query your data and see your results. It also self-documents. So over here on the Documentation Explorer, it will actually create that automatically based on the schema that you had to write anyway. So I really love this. When I was first starting out, a lot of times we have a front-end team and a back-end team, and the back-end team is involved with the API, and the front-end team has to call the API. But I don't know if you've ever tried to write a front-end interface when you don't know what the parameters, what the object looks like. You need to know what all those things are called. And this is where the graphical comes in beautifully, because it's going to tell you exactly what the parameters are called and what everything looks like so that you can build your UI.
Super simplice.
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 Yeah.
You're doing such a good job.
Yeah, high five. Yeah.
The best way to learn GraphQL is to try it out. And this cool guy, Nicholas Burke, wrote an awesome full stack tutorial that you can find at howtographql.com.
I just want to mention something, because when I first did my GraphQL full stack tutorial, I really wanted to learn GraphQL, and I said, it's hard to learn new things. We're busy, right? We don't have time to learn one more thing. It's like a stack of to-dos. But I had actually set aside, I think 2 days to go through this whole tutorial and learn it. I finished it in like half a day. It was not that hard. It's so close to what you, once you start looking at it, it's going to be Simplice. Simplice. Yeah. OK, next up is Hasura. Shout out to my friend Tanmai.
Yeah, Tanmai.
Check this out. You define your schema, which is an interface, and then run Hasura. It will auto-generate your endpoint services for you. Think about this. How many services have you written just for basic CRUD operations? Right? We do this all day, every day, all the time. Write the data, get the data, move the data, delete, add, all this stuff. So many services that we write all the time that are just around CRUD. So this guy, Tanmai, figured out how to spin those up on the fly based on your data model. How cool is that?
That is so cool.
Right? I was very excited when I found out about that.
GraphQL boilerplates. There's a free collection of production-ready GraphQL boilerplate projects in this GraphQL repo that you can clone and start using immediately.
I wish they had these when we first started learning GraphQL. It would have saved me a lot of time. That's our talk. Grazie. Ciao, fellas.